Alrighty, so here we are. We're going to wrap up our animation as far as Cinema 4D goes. We are going to move on to the next step, which is After Effects. So just to recap, there are obviously a handful of people who are using like a text-based project where you're simply just using a motext. Other people are doing the Illustrator route. I'm doing kind of a hybrid of the two, where I drew some assets in Illustrator, other assets I've made in front of us using motext objects and the spline wrap. So I've got all these cool, fun elements going. In the sake of time, I'm not going to do a whole lot of texturing work, unfortunately, to this because I would like to render this out within this lecture. So hopefully this doesn't look too poor. Obviously there's not a whole lot going on in the lighting, so I'm just going to set up just something really quick. It's probably not going to look all that awesome. Being a harsh critic of myself, I know that I'm not going to be super happy with it, but what can you do? So we're going to set up a area light up here. Going to enable our shadows. So I'm going to go super quick through a lot of this, just because, well, we kind of need to. One thing that I haven't touched on a whole lot is details. Yes. So in our in our light, under the details tab, we have this inverse square fall off, which will put a globe sort of around our light. And from that globe, we have extra handles that open up, which sort of determine how much or how far the illumination will travel. Without getting too, I guess, technical or boring, light is a form of energy. In reality, I mean, and it is a form of energy that decays over distance. So what fall off is obviously the lights that are in the back of the room don't really reach or illuminate the front of the room as strong as they do kind of from their origin point. You can actually see that very clearly if you just look at the ceiling tiles in the back of the wall. You can see how that light falls off from directly above the light source, and then as you travel here to the front of the room, you see that gradient through those lights. So that is an example of what fall off is. I almost always will use fall off enabled on my lights, because for the most part I do stuff, or I strive to do stuff that looks as realistic as I can make it. That's just kind of my style, and you will develop a style of your own as you journey into 3D animation. So I'm going to color these lights ever so slightly differently from each other, because having a little bit of contrast, a little bit of warm tones, a little bit of cool tones, etc., can really help sell your project. So let's name these real quick, just for organizational sake. So we're going to add just two more just to the sides of each light, and we're going to put these ever so slightly behind the object, and they're going to serve sort of as rim lights. The term rim light will be explained a little bit more in the next assignment, but if you are in the photography or videography world, you might be a little bit familiar with those. So I just typically name lights dependent on camera location. So in this case, obviously, the light that's here on the left is the left light, so on and so forth. I'm going to pull the color out of those two lights, and then we're going to hit render and see what we get. So not too bad. The shadowing from the text casting onto the globe is kind of cool. I really wish that I had some sort of texture. I might even just try to do that metal plate texture. So I'm going to just look up like a metal plate kind of deal. One of these. I'm going to throw one of these on something. This is kind of cool. This is like a hex mesh. That's kind of cool. Just stuff that fits the vibe of my, you know, product or whatever you want to call it. Call of Duty being a brand, sort of in and of itself, kind of a, you know, a line of games. There is the sort of rugged, military, whatever, manly vibe to it. So we're gonna make some cool textures out of these real quick. So here on my black material, this is going to be the one that we're going to put the diamond plate into. We're going to put it into the bump channel, and it's not going to be too apparent, I don't believe. There's a hint of it in there. I'm going to have to scale down this texturing a bit, but you can see it a little bit on these rim plates. So we're going to select those. That's this group here and this group. So on these ones, to make the sort of patterning of this material a little bit different or a little bit tighter, what I'm going to do, I believe we've kind of gone over this a little bit, is raise the tiling on the U and V portions of the tags here. These two tags, I selected them both at the same time using Control. Yada yada yada. We're going to raise up this bump strength to like 250% just so that it pops. Hopefully. It's kind of hard to tell, so we're just going to keep going until I think I'm somewhere. Yeah, that's starting to get somewhere now. One thing I do notice is on this black band, this one's not looking too hot, so I'm going to find this texture, and in this case UV mapping isn't going to work very excellently on an object that I generated by hand. So I'm going to try cubic or cylindrical and just see if either of those kind of help me out a little bit. So that's not too bad right there. So do the same thing, raise the tiling a bit, and I don't want to spend too long on this because we have plenty else to do, so we're just going to try to hope. We're just going to hope that this works out without fighting us too much. Okay. So in addition to just plugging this image into the bump, I'm going to plug it into the color channel as well, just so that it's going to give a little bit of information, and I'm going to pull that this mix strength value down because I know ahead of time that I'm not going to want the full effect of that image visually. And then we're also going to plug it into a reflectance layer. So I'm going to make a new reflectance layer. Again, we typically use GGX when we are selecting it out of the list. Raise this roughness, lower that reflection strength quite a bit, and then here in the texture is where I'm going to plug in this diamond plate. And that's not looking too bad up there, but this ribbon is kind of struggling a bit, so I'm going to try to figure out what I can do there on the texture tag. Again, I'm using a cylindrical projection. I'm going to try to change it to a cubic just because I know I'm a little bit more familiar with cubic and how cubic works. Looks like crap. Okay, that's looking pretty sweet. I'm pretty happy with the black material, so we're going to jump into the gold. Kind of do the same sort of process, but I'm going to use the hexagon texture that I had instead of the diamond plate. Pretty much going to follow the same process here where we're going to pump up this bump texture quite a bit. And because there's such a small amount of the gold that we even see, I might not even do a whole lot more to it. I'm just going to copy the same settings over from the previous metal that I just did because I was pretty happy with how that turned out. Cool. So we're just going to add a little bit of reflection to this globe material, which I'm using sort of a world map. I just googled world map. Pretty straightforward. Not a whole lot to that. So this, because of the way that this texture is right here, I know it's a really small thumbnail, but if you're watching the video, you'll be able to see it, hopefully. The black and white image of this earth. Just like how a Photoshop mask works, black means it's hiding and white means it's revealing. And in this case, because it's a globe, and for the most part, if you're looking at a photograph of Earth out from space, water is what looks reflective and not necessarily the surface of the terrain. So I want to invert this. I could just in Photoshop open up this thing, hit Control-I to invert the color channel, save it out, yada yada. But you can do that right in Cinema, kind of save ourselves a little bit of trouble. So in order to do that, we're going to use the layer shader. So I think I've shown a couple people this individually, but just as you know, kind of a broad demonstration, we are used to loading in a texture using these three dots over here on the right. There's also this arrow on the left-hand side of a texture slot, and this is where there's a lot of magic hiding underneath this little arrow. You click it, and there's a whole big old list. But in this case, what we're looking for is the layer shader. The layer shader, once we click it, we now see the word layer, which is prompting us to click into this. So now we want to think of this menu here as almost a miniature Photoshop document. If you're familiar with the layer system in Photoshop, it basically works from the bottom top. So whatever is highest up on the list will affect items below it. So what we can do, if I am not wrong, is add a colorize layer above this bitmap. And so the way the colorize layer works is much like a gradient in Photoshop. The knots, the positioning of these little handles that we can input, left is the darker value and white is the brighter value. So typically a gradient by default looks like this, where black is on the left and white is on the right. You can invert this by basically just reversing these knots. So if we put white on the left and black on the right, we can now see that this image is reversed. And if I, oopsie daisy, if I open this in a new window, just so that we can see nice and big, the water of this texture is what is reflective now, which is what I want. But it's obviously way too strong. So I just want to pull down this reflection strength value right here, and we can see now in my little preview that that ain't too bad. So our water is going to reflect. I know it's super teeny tiny, but we're going to be able to zoom into it later. I can see some of these reflections already taking place. So I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to save. I have a little bit of animation as well, where this logo sort of spins around and kind of reveals what's all going on. So I would expect you to have some sort of animation as well in your scene, whether it's text, kind of moving towards the camera, away from the camera. You've got some sort of Illustrator file that you drew out and extruded. You've got some textures, some animation, some lighting. Check all those off the list. So now we are ready to set up our render. So we're going to want to jump into our render settings. And here our width and height are good. We can leave those as is right now. Again, in this case, because we are rendering an animation, we want to make sure that we render all of our frames. So we're going to do all frames. And then under save, we are going to input a name and a location for our file. So this is going to go into a renders folder. I always do this. So this is going to be the location of my render for my second project. This is it's almost redundantly named at this point. So I'm not going to lose this file. But the magic here, which we have not covered yet, is enabling the alpha channel. So again, if you are a Photoshop user, the concept of an alpha channel will be hopefully familiar. If not, the description I just made with that globe, where we were looking at the texture of the globe, that is the same concept, where the black is going to be hiding or not revealed, and the white is going to be revealed. So when we come to rendering this, I'll show you exactly what that means. But this is super duper important for us to be able to put a background on our file. If you do not have your alpha channel enabled and you render, it will put whatever's in the background of your scene as pure black. In this case, if I just do a little preview render, all of this black space on the side of my frame is going to be baked into this render. What I mean by that is it's not removable. You're not going to have an easy time being able to put or composite in a background in After Effects. And in the case of the Gotham example, that is very important because we need to put some sort of cloud imagery, storm clouds, whatever. It could even be footage if we are, a video person and we're familiar with working with footage. Something to put into the background of this to sort of spice up what we're going to be working with. And even in this Call of Duty example, if we just look at this at a surface level, it looks all black. And I apologize for the projector not really showing it very well, but on the recording, hopefully if you're watching, we'll be able to see that there is a bit of a glow around this. Right around here, there's a bit of banding, which indicates to me that there is a glow, which this render would in fact require, or I shouldn't say require, it would benefit from having the alpha channel enabled. So I'm going to stop yakking and get to rendering. So we're just going to set up our anti-aliasing. This is the last thing that we typically jump into. This all should be good. Shouldn't need to worry about anything in here. And I think I'm ready. So I'm going to save one last time and then click render. And we're just going to let this thing do its thing. Hopefully, because we are going to be cutting class a little bit early because of the snowstorm, hopefully we get through all this. If not, I don't know, we'll see. But fingers crossed, we'll get there. If not, this lecture will be picked back up Tuesday. It looks like that took 30 seconds for one frame. So if we do some render math, we can figure out how long this will take. So 150 times 30 is that many seconds, and then you divide that by 60 to get that many minutes, and then you divide that by 60 to get that many hours. So it'll take a little over an hour. That kind of puts us pretty close to our 7 o'clock self-imposed deadline. So that sort of bums me out. I think what I'll do in the meantime is I can probably omit the first little portion of my animation and do some sort of like flash or like a bright sort of burst in After Effects to sort of save ourselves a little bit of time, because I'm really not going to be showing a whole lot of this sort of in this region here anyway, because I want this logo to kind of rotate in fast and then sort of do its thing at the end. So we're gonna stop the render. And we're going to pick it back up at frame 50. And that'll save us a little bit of time. Obviously, this is something unique to this lecture. I'm not going to give you permission to do this, to only render a portion of your animation, because you've worked so hard and created so many awesome things. I want to see all of it, all right? So I guess sit tight. If you're watching the recording, this will pick back up in 2 or 3 seconds. We'll see how this goes. All right, so we're back in action. As you can see, not the whole render is finished, but we're sort of narrowing in on time, so I'm going to cut this render a little early. Drag that out of the way. So my thing is doing, or my scene is doing its thing rendering here. I've got at least enough frames to where I could start the next step. Obviously, you'll want to wait till yours is all the way done, but I want to demonstrate what that alpha channel is doing now that we have some frames here. So if I select layer on the right hand side here, again I'm in the picture viewer, this is where the render is happening. So I select layer, and by default it's probably going to set up where it's on image and on background. But if I change it to single pass and then select alpha, we can see that this white and black image is now representation, or is a representation of our alpha channel. Again, going back to the Photoshop example, black is where we didn't have anything, or where everything was hidden, I should say, and white is where stuff is present, stuff is showing up. So this is going to allow us, in this section that's black back here, to add background, color effects, glows, all sorts of fun stuff using After Effects. So let's jump into that now. And it'll take forever to open. But luckily, that means that we'll get some more frames done. So just to go back, to get out of this, we want to select background and then the word image, and then we can go back to the history tab. So while After Effects is booting up, we're just going to kind of sit tight. This is going to be super slow and upset. So I don't recommend trying to use your computer for anything while it's still rendering. This is going to be a struggle here, I'm sure. But one last thing that I did forget, and I'm a little bit bummed about because it doesn't take a whole lot of time, is while I'm killing time here, is recommending that you animate your lights. Animating lights is an easy thing that has a pretty decent payoff in most cases. And what I mean by that is we see on the far left side and far right side of my scene, we see these lights. One is moving from bottom to top, and the other light is moving from top to bottom. And if we look at the chrome here, we can see some of these highlights are moving around, and that is going to give us some pretty interesting shadows, some pretty interesting reflections, and just an all-around little bit more enhanced render. So don't neglect that. I would definitely recommend doing it in most scenes, just as an extra little boost to how cool your scene might look. So I'm just going to close that, and I'm going to import my render just by double-clicking on the left-hand side here. Let me go back to my folder that's super duper named. So here in After Effects, it's demonstrating or showing off our alpha channel because I'm not seeing black backgrounds on my frames, which is cool. So again, to import, I want to left-click once on the first frame, verify that the word sequence, the file format, and then sequence is checked on, which is good, and then I can hit import. And it's saying ignore that. It's just because I've been sort of goofing around with this render, starting and stopping. We can hit OK. Oh, right. So this pop-up here, this is our alpha channel. At least for the most part, you can leave it on the setting here, which is straight, unmatted. Once in a while, you probably won't run into it in this class, but once in a while, you'll have to check on the pre-multiplied and then change this color to white. I don't believe that we're going to run into this, but it's just something that possibly if you see weird edges around your image, sometimes it's referred to as haloing or banding, or if it looks like crunchy, try to re-import it using that different setting. At any rate, I can come down and bring this into the timeline. Cool, that's still complaining. So I know that I need to start my render on frame 50, at least for me. Again, that this isn't going to apply to everyone. It's just because I've been messing around. And I'm going to make sure that this is 150 frames long, because eventually my render will fill up this whole sequence. But at any rate, I have enough here to start working. So if I hit spacebar, After Effects will load in this animation. It'll play back, and it's playing back pretty cool. So I'm going to add a little bit of a glow around this object, and I can do that a number of ways. I'm going to try the layer style. So layer, where's layer styles? Layer style, I'm going to try an outer glow and just see how awful this looks. It might look like crap. We'll just have to see. So I'm going to zoom in pretty tight so that hopefully we can see what's going on. And this monitor is super, super tiny. So in my reference, which is no longer open, it is not this awful yellow color. It is a white, and its spread is quite a bit larger, and hopefully, yeah, so it's more like that. Obviously not that bright. So I can lower the opacity here. So it's a little bit closer to that. Maybe even that's too much. That pop-up is going to get annoying. So I've got a little bit of a glow there. And what I want to do, because my animation is sort of starting part-way through, I'm going to start with sort of like a flash of light. Actually, before I get into that, I'm going to get into what will apply to most people, and that is just adding a background image. So let's just say that I was looking up a smoke background. Okay. Let's just say that this is what I wanted to be in the background of my animation. You could have clouds, it could be a landscape, who knows what. Everyone's scene will be different. I'm just going to save this to my textures folder, which will be cool. And then show in folder. And I'm just going to drag this right into the bin over here on the left. It'll import. And then now to get it behind my image, or my render, what I want to do is drag it down to a layer that's below my render in the timeline. So much like how Photoshop works, stuff that is above will show in precedent versus stuff that is further down in the stack. So again, if I do this the wrong way, we'll see that the smoke is covering my logo, which is not what I want. I want my smoke to be below my logo. And this is way too smoky, at least for me, for my tastes. So I'm going to lower the opacity. Again, we get to the opacity just by opening up this little arrow, and then there's the opacity. There's also a hotkey, which is T on your keyboard. But anyway, getting back to this, so that we've got a little bit of a background. Raise that up just a little bit more. It would be cool if I had some sort of animated smoke or maybe footage or whatever. If you're a wizard in After Effects, feel free to create some kind of cool animation to put back here to kind of enhance your render, show it off a little bit cooler even. But let's get back to that flash of light. So this is kind of a common technique. It's more of like an editing technique if you're from the video world. Is a bit of a transition. If you think to like TV or sports broadcasts, it's called like a flash or a burn is the term for this, are pretty common to sort of jump to like the next shot or whatever. You'll see like a flash of light. It'll be real quick. So to add that, what we want to do is we want to add a new layer. So layer, new, solid. And this menu will pop up. In my case, I want to make it relatively bright white. So I'm going to hit OK. That was for the color, so then I'm going to hit OK to accept the whole layer. So now this white layer, I'm going to rename Flash. This layer is above. So currently it's occupying the whole timeline. At no point is my render visible, which is not what I want. I want to make this flash go away quickly. So it'll start at full opacity and lower down to no opacity in the blink of an eye. So I'm going to open up my opacity, again hitting T. I know this isn't an After Effects course, so I'm just going to try to do the basics. After Effects is a super important thing to know if you're going to be getting into motion graphics and even just 3D in general. It is a very, very valuable tool. I cannot recommend not knowing After Effects. I can't recommend skipping that in good conscience. But anyway, to set up a keyframe, remember we want this to start at 100% and go all the way down to 0. The way that we do that, pretty similar to Cinema 4D. There's this little circle icon. It's actually a stopwatch, if you look closely. Just next to the parameter, it's kind of similar to the red keyframe dot that we're used to in Cinema, but when we click it, it turns blue. And over here in the timeline, we see this blue diamond. This is reminiscent of the little blue rectangles underneath our timeline in Cinema, kind of like these little guys. So we have our first keyframe, and when we mouse over it, it says 100%. Straightforward enough. So if we come forward in our timeline, and I'm only going to go a couple frames, in this case 10, and then we're just going to lower this down to 0. And we get this cool pop-up. And now when we mouse over this, this says 0%. So hopefully, if we play this back, it'll be like a big white bright flash, and then we see this cool globe thing spinning into action, and if we give this a little bit longer to render out in Cinema, we'll have the full kind of tail end, and then we can do some sort of animation at the end, maybe, if we're really feeling up to it. If not, that's okay. But I'm pretty happy with this as far as my scene goes. So from here, I would want to make sure that, in this case, I'm going to save my After Effects project because I've worked so hard on this. It would be a shame to lose all of this progress. So we're going to save. This will be and this will save an After Effects project, which I can open up and use later to render, because I'm not ready to render, just because my Cinema 4D file is still almost thinking it's close, but not quite. So you would want to refer back to the last set of After Effects to add the composition, the render queue, setting up the QuickTime settings, all that fun stuff. But if you've got it down, cool. But yeah, that's going to get cut out of this portion of the lecture just because of time's sake. So once that is done and rendered out of After Effects, we copy it onto the server. You guys know the deal at this point. So that'll wrap up the second project. So we'll have another workday Tuesday, and depending on how we're going, maybe a little bit more the following Thursday. Not the whole class, but maybe some. We might work it like last time where I give you guys like an hour to get stuff turned in, and then on the second portion of class I will begin the next assignment. So yeah, that'll wrap that up.